Okay, without further ado, we'll start with the readings.
This is from my first book, Waxing is Useless. It's urban fantasy, set here in Spokane. Miranda Moon tapped her pencil rhythmically against her thigh and twisted in the uncomfortable office chair. Her supervisor, Angela, had been dressing her down for half an hour, and her attention had wandered. Something was very wrong with her and her life. In the last 8 months, the comfortable and predictable existence she built had crumbled like a burnt kale leaf. Not that she would eat kale. Her husband, Hank, lost his job at the plant, a job they thought he'd retire from eventually. Now, however, after 15 years of being a stay-at-home mom, she'd been forced to take an office job to make ends meet. Miranda was grateful for the work, but didn't really enjoy data entry. It paid less than half what Hank had made at the plant, but with his unemployment money, it was keeping the family afloat while he searched for a new job. Unused to office life, stress took its toll. Exhausted by the end of every day, she gave up her volunteer position at the kids' school and at church. Her hair was falling out. She had a weird rash on her belly. Her muscles felt weak and her joints ached constantly. Her body was no longer able to keep up with the everyday demands of her life, and it made her sad, angry, and frustrated all at the same time. She hated this job and wasn't overly fond of her supervisor. But the family needed her income, so she persevered. Miranda reminded herself that she wasn't the only one to make sacrifices. With their newly limited budget, the entire Moon family had to cut corners. No more Netflix, Book of the Month Club, gym membership, or gaming sites. No more multiple after-school clubs or sports either. The kids were told to pick one activity and stick with it. The clothing budget was limited to absolute necessities, and their food budget slashed. They now counted on the local food bank to round out their grocery list at the end of every month. The changes had been hard on everyone, but the stress had taken an obvious physical toll on her, and Miranda found it difficult to focus on what her manager was saying. Her head felt full of fog. Everything was unclear, out of reach. She stifled a jaw-cracking yawn, and despite her best effort to pay attention, her traitorous brain turned Angela's voice into white noise that slowly morphed into golden oldies music. The Police's Don't Stand So Close to Me gave way to Don Henley's Dirty Laundry, before segueing into Sir Elton's Benny and the Jets. With her fingers moving of their own accord, Miranda was deep into her mental music montage, thoughtlessly pencil drumming along, when Angela's already strident voice pitched up an octave. It sliced through her brain fog with the ruthlessness of a lightsaber. Startled and guilty, Miranda looked up at her angry supervisor. "Are you hearing anything I'm saying to you, Miranda?" Angela leveled a stern look at her through her tortoiseshell cat-eye glasses. Her bottle blonde hair was stuck up in all directions, shellacked into place with so much product, Miranda bet she could grate cheese on it. Pencil paused in midair. She focused on Angela's incredulous face and blushed. "I'm sorry, Angela. It's just, well..." Miranda couldn't describe what she was feeling beyond being more exhausted than she'd ever been. Worse even than that 3-day flu bug she suffered last year. There was no way to describe the depth of her bone-aching fatigue to a micromanaging whirlwind like Angela. She wouldn't understand. Besides, with her current level of brain fog, the words wouldn't come to her. They hovered on the peripherals of her mind, tickled the tip of her tongue, and flitted out of reach. "It's just what?" Angela pulled her brown cardigan tightly around her shoulders and leaned forward. Despite her short stature, Angela's chair was set to its highest level. She kept a small step stool under her desk to help her climb into it. Miranda figured it was a strategic move to give her diminutive boss a more menacing, authoritarian look. What it did was make her look like a blonde, bespectacled barn owl perched on a rafter. "What's the problem, Miranda? You've called in sick 9 times in the last 2 months. Even when you're here, you're not keeping up. Your productivity has dropped 23%, and now it seems you can't make it through a short meeting without checking out." Miranda couldn't tell Angela her entire life was imploding. Her husband, jobless. Her 2 teenagers, unhappy with the new restrictions and moodier than usual. Her failing health had not only ruined their last family outing, she'd also racked up some hefty medical bills. She felt about as useless as a pitchfork at a Jell-O eating contest. Angela was right. She'd missed a lot of work recently, staying home with weird symptoms that came and went. As if that wasn't enough, though, she had the feeling something strange was going on around her. A feeling of being watched. Most of the time, it was a peripheral kind of thing, there but non-threatening, calming even. Occasionally, though, she'd experience a frightening chill of awareness, a feeling her mom would have described as someone walking over her grave.
All right.
Yes. All right. So, our next reader is Jeremy. Jeremy Howe, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Jeremy, this is my first and only book right now, Simon's Dream. It's a paranormal fantasy thriller kind of book. So I'll just start right from the beginning. I also have a character named Hank and Angela as well, so it's kind of cool. Okay, so we'll start with Chapter 1, Chicago, Illinois, present day. The beeping of the alarm clock was the first thing I heard this morning, just like every weekday morning. Well, almost every weekday morning. Sometimes I wake up to the neighbors arguing, or the garbage truck below my window outside emptying the dumpster behind the apartment building. But on most mornings, such as this one, it was the alarm clock, the most reliable thing in my life. I reach over and shut it off, ready to start another workday. I examine myself in the bathroom mirror. My scraggly, curly brown hair has grown longer than I usually allow it to. Blue eyes and a short yet pointy nose fill out the rest of my average features. I'm not ugly, but I doubt most women would consider me cute or handsome either. The best word to describe me would be average. The type of an average man that would be a perfect candidate for a police lineup, the victim of a crime taking their time on the other side of the glass, passing over me knowing I'm innocent. I take a shower, shave, and get dressed, all while shaking off the cobwebs of last night's dream, which were becoming increasingly vivid every passing night. Dreams of being a police officer in Chicago, but they make no sense. Every night they're jumbled and disjointed until eventually the dream fades away and I forget about what happened, until I have another similar dream. Morning, Hank, I mumble while sprinkling food into a small tank. I just cleaned the tank last night, and it's immaculate. A small pirate ship is front and center on the floor of the tank, resting on tiny bluish green pebbles. Bending down to watch my buddy Hank, I can see my reflection in the glass. The little goldfish, my only roommate, swims toward the food eagerly and begins to gobble up his breakfast. Good boy, I'll do the same. I pour myself a bowl of cereal, then check the fridge for milk. Opening the carton and taking a rancid sniff, I toss it into the sink and take a step back, shaking my head. That's not good. The cereal will just have to be dry this morning. That's just wonderful. Now my routine is already out of whack. I hate it when my routine gets disrupted. When I get to my car, it won't start. I turn the key in the ignition several times, pumping the gas pedal. This car is on its last legs, which I've known for quite some time. Come on, I growl. Don't do this to me now. I keep turning the key, the engine cranking without starting. Finally, after several more tries, it finally starts. As I exit the parking lot, the car backfires, scattering a flock of birds. The morning commute to Lowland Woods Golf Course is uneventful, just the usual dealing with people that either want to go 20 over or 10 under the speed limit. It's a race to some, as if they're in a life or death situation, swimming frantically toward the egg. To others, it seems to be a frightening experience, like they haven't left the house in a few weeks, and the speed of the world is just too much for them to handle. I just try to make it to where I'm going without getting killed. If there's one thing I've discovered in my 23 years of life so far, it's that it doesn't matter how fast I drive. Eventually, there will be a red light up ahead, and we'll all be waiting there together. I clock on my shift on time as always. Punctuality is one of my few specialties, a trait taught to me by my stepfather, Doug. A man that I don't much care for, but he did serve our country and community with decorated honors. Respect is something that he commands more than deserves, in my humble opinion. I may not be the fastest or most accurate worker at the golf course, but at least I can show up on time. It's the least I can do for this company that's given me a sense of purpose in a life that 5 years ago had little purpose. Good morning, Simon. The cheerful, cute young front desk attendant, Brittany, waves happily at me. Good morning, Brittany. She's a beautiful young woman around my age with jet black hair and heavy mascara around her brown eyes. Today is Friday, and this will complete her 3rd week on the job. The rest of her is a total mystery to me, and I'm fine with keeping it that way. For the next 8 hours, I serve the Chicago community by driving around in a golf cart with a metal cage around it, referred to as a range picker. scooping up golf balls on the driving range. Rich businessmen who either take the day off or are on an extended lunch enjoy coming to the Lowland Woods golf course to blow off some steam and whack a bucket of golf balls around for hours on end. Golf isn't exactly my favorite sport. As a matter of fact, I don't like any sort of organized sports. Hitting a small ball into a hole with a stick is about as simple a game as I can think of. I don't really consider golf to be a sport. I don't dare say that around here, though. A loud clank hits the side of the metal cage, followed by hoots of laughter off in the distance from a couple hundred yards away. The men high-five one another, and another man takes his turn intentionally aiming the golf ball at the cart. At first, I found this type of behavior to be immature, and the sound of the golf ball striking the side of the cage to be jarring. But after 4 years on the job, I've become used to it. My coworkers don't talk to me while on the clock, probably because I typically have my headphones on while driving around the caged cart, or while in the break room, or anywhere that I'm not associating with customers. The job is simple, enjoyable, and most importantly, follows a routine. Every day is typically the same as the last, and that's exactly how I like it. Unexpected excitement is not something that I particularly enjoy, and I'd much rather be back in my apartment spending time with Hank, listening to a podcast, or reading a good book. Having a job that follows an uneventful basic routine is very therapeutic and has helped me immensely with trying to find out who it is that I really am. I often wonder if I was meant for more, like serving the community as Doug did, or serving the community as a police officer, like I do in my hazy dreams. As a kid growing up, I wanted to be a police officer. Laws are essentially rules for society to abide by, and I love rules because they follow a form of structure. If you stay within the specified guidelines, then you're okay. However, if you deviate from the written procedures in order to gain some sort of an advantage or harm another person maliciously in some way, then you've broken a rule and you'd be put in a timeout. It makes sense when they're broken down in a way that a small child can understand. Enforcement of laws are something that I've always felt to be necessary in order for society to stay functional. Otherwise, there would be chaos and anarchy. That being said, I'm not a cop enforcing the laws of the land. Instead, I'm picking up golf balls in a motorized steel cage and serving as a form of target practice for rich men in sportswear.
That's awesome. And Dave, you're up.
I'm just going to throw this back up
Wait,
Oh, thank you.
you're pretty fast.
Okay, last week, those that were at our meeting last week, remember I read the beginning of a little short story called Mr. Townsend's Chronometer. This is a scene that occurs later on in the story and a lot later on in time. On the flight deck, time to get in proper flight deck gear. Helmets on, goggles down. Check chocks, chains, and tie downs. Check for FOD. Start them up. The air boss's voice boomed from the 5MC on USS George H.W. Bush. Crewmen in a rainbow of colors moved about the deck, preparing to launch the first sorties of the day. Power cables were connected, fueling hoses stowed, and tow tractors mounting air start units or huffers positioned at the aircraft slated for this first event. Flight personnel came on deck from the catwalks and approached their assigned aircraft. Plane captains saluted them, and the naval aviators and naval flight officers began a thorough walk-around. Captain Ray Salvador watched the activity from the bridge. After 2 weeks of flight operations, things were going well. Hitches experienced at the beginning of the current at-sea period were behind them, and the deck functioned smoothly. He rarely intervened in daily flight operations, knowing the Air Department and Air Wing were competent and well-trained. Still, having ultimate responsibility, he kept a close watch on everything. 2 helicopters lifted from the angle deck and disappeared into the haze. One would remain nearby as a plane guard, ready to plunk down crewmen from the water if an aircraft crashed into the sea. The other would range farther out, looking for vessels getting too near the carrier and her escorts, as well as conducting anti-submarine drills. The shrill whine of jet engines grew as those aircraft set up for the first launch throttled up and moved to the catapults. Blue-shirted crewmen moved with them, wheel chocks in hands, ready to put under the wheels when needed. An EA-6B prowler waited behind a jet blast deflector of Catapult 1. The Hawkeye, already there, launched, steam billowing from the slot in the cat track. The shuttle hit the end with a thump felt throughout the ship. The prowler taxied over the lowered JBD and dropped its launch bar into the shuttle. Green-shirted catapult crewmen darted under the aircraft to install the holdback assembly. The pilot advanced the throttles to full power, checked for full movement of all flight controls, and saluted the catapult officer. The shooter flung his arm forward. A second later, as steam pressure built up in the catapult's twin cylinders, the holdback snapped and the aircraft accelerated along the deck. Airborne, the pilot retracted the landing gear and the EA-6B turned gently away and began a slow climb. 5 minutes later, the phone at the captain's bridge chair jangled into life. "Captain speaking," said Saldivar. "CVIC, Captain. We have an unidentified surface contact dead ahead, just over the horizon." "On radar?" "No, sir. Indian Gal 612 spotted it, and Garuda 507 has seen it as well." "Well, what the hell is it? Have you made contact?" After the slightest of pauses, the voice on the phone said, "It's a sailing vessel of some kind. They nearly panic every time Indian Gal approaches, and they don't respond to any radio calls. On our current course, we risk running them down." "Hold one. Hold I." Saldivar's brain worked feverishly. The launch was in full effect, one aircraft after another lining up and shooting off the deck. Based on the ship's speed, the time required to complete the launch, and the estimated location of the surface contact, they would not be finished before the possibility of a collision. "Suspend the launch," he ordered. An F-18D Hornet, already in tension, shot along the waistcat and into the air. Aircraft taxied to parking spots, were chalked and tied down, and engines shut off. Rear Admiral Ulrich, carrier group commander, stormed into the captain's bridge. After impatiently listening to the captain's explanation, he sighed and said, "The Brits are closer, so have HMS Diamond take a look. Tell them to send a boarding party if needed, but find out why that vessel is there." "Hold fast, men, hold fast," Townsend yelled. They were in near panic, and to tell the truth, he was not far behind. Just as they had set the forenoon watch, a distant roar was heard, and moments later a huge flying thing approached, seemingly suspended under a vibrating, shimmering disc. It darted about, sometimes near the water, other times a mere speck in the air. It came close enough that Townsend and others could see lettering and markings on it. Gray on gray, the lettering was hard to distinguish, and they were unable to make it out. Another airborne vessel approached at terrific speed and roared by just above the mastheads. The sound it produced was akin to one long, drawn-out broadside from a first-rate ship of the line. It circled in the distance.
All right. Next reader is Sue Eller.
What you call an intruder? That's not an intruder.
I'm going to read a little thing from my short story book called The Corn Dog Continuum.
Yes.
And I'll read you the little intro to it. This tale of woe began in an actual factory. It's based on a true experience and exposes my less than enthusiastic attitude toward assembly line work in general and food preparation and packaging in particular. Hopefully, I've grown up since I quit the job. Okay. I'm stuck in a crack in space-time and am doomed to live this day for infinity. My name is Geraldine, and I started a new job today. After weeks of searching for gainful employment, I finally found my niche, or so I thought. Desperation and hunger and a desire to continue to sleep indoors clouded my vision. I was deluded into thinking that a job in the local corn dog factory was indeed the ideal. It should be simple, right? I mean, how hard can it be to make corn dogs? How little I knew. I showed up for work the next morning about 5 minutes early, My supervisor gave me a time card and showed me how to operate the time clock. I was not to clock in early or clock out late, she informed me in a stern voice. I was also to clock out for a half-hour lunch at precisely noon. Oh, and don't forget to clock back in at exactly 12:30, she admonished. We waited as the incessant ticks of the time clock brought us closer to the hour. When the minute hand moved to the proper mark, a loud whistle emanated from somewhere in the back of the factory. I inserted my time card, which was stamped 0800. I followed my new boss into the locker room, where I was issued a grease-stained coverall and a mesh cap. Health Department regulations, she explained. I was also presented with a pair of heavy-duty rubber gloves to protect my hands from the hot grease used in the deep fryers. The final fashion accessory was a pair of rubber covers for my shoes. Thus outfitted, I was ushered through another door and into the bowels of the factory. It was noisy with the clank of all the machines, and my boss had to shout to be heard, even though she stood right next to me. I saw long iron bars with holes in them and handles extending upward at right angles. The handles had hooks on the ends of them. One of the workers was skewering hot dogs with long wooden sticks. Another worker opened the long bar and placed a wooden stick in each depression, then clamped it back together with a snap. Each bar held 8 hot dogs on sticks, which would come out on the other end as finished corn dogs. A conveyor belt carried the bars to the next station, which was my assigned place. My job was to dip each bar full of hot dogs in batter and hook it on another conveyor belt, which carried the contraption through a long, narrow trough of hot grease. At the other end, a worker would unhook the bar and release the dogs onto another conveyor belt that took them to be packaged. Pretty slick operation, wouldn't you think? Simple job, too. Or so I thought. My boss demonstrated the process to me, then watched me attempt it. I grasped both the bar handles, dunked the dogs in the batter, swirled them around, pulled them out, and hooked the handles on the continuously moving belt. I watched as it traversed the narrow vat of grease, bubbling and popping on its merry way to the other side. I couldn't see the face of the person on the other end. You didn't get them covered well enough, the boss lady shouted at me. She demonstrated one more time and watched me until she was satisfied that I could do it right. The crack in space-time widened, and I stepped into it as I took my station in front of the vat of batter and the trough of grease. Enthusiastic, I grabbed the handles of the bar to my right, expertly dipped and swirled the suspended dogs in the batter, and sent them on their frying way. Before she had left me, the boss gave me instructions on timing the grease submersion step. If you get them too close together, the guy at the other end won't be able to get them off and empty them. But if you get them too far apart, it slows production way down. Keep a steady pace and don't mess up the battering part. She shook her head and walked away. I was determined to disprove her low opinion of my abilities. I was getting into the rhythm. Grasp, dip, swirl, lift, hook. Turn to my right and pick up another bar. Don't dip too soon or the batter will drip before they get in the deep fryer. Be precise and get a good swirl of batter on each dog. Every bar is a work of art. My brain was being sucked out and mixed in with the batter, and each trip to the grease fried more brain cells. Grasp, dip, swirl, lift, hook. Turn to my right and pick up another bar. I looked around for a clock and found none. Almost got out of rhythm without one. Grasp, dip, swirl, lift, hook. Turn to my right and pick up another bar. Don't get behind. Keep up, but don't hook them too close together. The crack in time was closing in around me. Grease saturated every pore of my face and pooled at the tip of my nose. Grasp, dip, swirl, lift, hook. Turn to my right and pick up another bar. Don't get behind. Keep up, but don't hook them too close together. I reached up and rubbed against an itch on my cheek. I left more grease on my face than I rubbed off. I experienced an endless time loop. Each completed task dragged me further into the void of fryer conversation. Both are impossible because of the deafening noise of the many machines. Nothing could penetrate the monotony, not even my own thoughts. I had entered a living hell. My eyes were blurred by a coating of oil, and my eyelashes threatened to stick together. I couldn't smell anything but rancid grease. The rack of bars loaded with future corn dogs clanked each time another was added to my station. I was getting lightheaded. I envisioned each molecule of oxygen coated in a droplet of grease. I was being sucked into the time vortex and would never get out. At least I wouldn't be homeless. I giggled and almost dropped the next bar. There was a thin layer of grease on my gloves, which made grasping the bars more difficult. I had to concentrate and grip hard to keep from dropping them. Suddenly, all was silent. The conveyor belts had come to a halt, except for the one traversing the trough of grease. I turned to my right to retrieve another bar and found none in the queue. I watched as the last of my handiwork was unhooked and processed. As I wondered what was happening, a loud whistle sounded, and all the workers around me trudged like a group of automatons toward the lunchroom. I turned to follow them and nearly slipped and fell on the slippery floor. Cautiously, I picked my way to the lunch area and into the locker room. I shed the coverall, mesh hat, rubber gloves, and shoe protectors and left them lying on the floor. I never looked back as I walked out the front door and climbed into the safety of my car. I had escaped the crack in space-time and ended my career as a factory worker. I will never eat another corn dog.
All right. Our next reader is John Miller.
Something a little different. Pass this around. This is a small piece out of a book I'm finishing up called Economics for Normal People, and it's stuff I taught at the University of Idaho for several years, and these were ancillary things that I used in my classroom. And while it is, I think, the most non-technical economics book that there ever has been, it does cover a wide range of economics topics, one that was taught in a 4-hour course at the university. This particular short piece that comes from a unit on what economists call market structure. And in that is a discussion of a market structure called competition, monopoly, oligopoly, where there are just a few firms, monopolistic competition, cartels, all kinds of things. And this is the one on monopoly, and it's called Uncle Emil and the Oaks Liquor Store.
And the what?
And the Oaks, that's a town in North Dakota, Oaks Liquor Store. When I was a young boy, I met my great uncle Emil Isaacson in Oaks, North Dakota. He was a farmer, but also owned the local liquor store. Liquor stores needed licenses granted by the county. Uncle Emil also served on the Dickey County Commission. During his period of public service, the county commission granted no other liquor licenses. My Uncle Emil had market power in Oaks. He had the only liquor store in town. He could raise the price of whiskey and people would still buy it. Of course, because of the law of demand, he sold less whiskey at a higher price, but the price increase more than compensated him for the lower amount of whiskey sold. If he raised the price too high, people would cut back their purchases too much, and Uncle Emil would make less profit. As a, quote, price setter, unquote, he had to set just the right price. I can imagine that Uncle Emil had to encounter many potential entrants to the Oaks liquor market over the years, and as a county commissioner, he was likely involved in discussions about this with his Norwegian-American neighbors. In both official and unofficial settings, he might have said, I'm not sure we want to open Oaks up to more liquor availability. Do we want Main Street to have more liquor store signs? Do we want the liquor business to expand in Oaks? to have our town look more and more like downtown Fargo, and the neighbors would frown in agreement, content to have Uncle Emil manning the last foxhole in the battle against demon rum. The normal people of Oaks hardly even thought about the extra profits, monopoly profits, that would accrue to Uncle Emil. Economists, of course, are not normal people and would point out the implications of the liquor market structure in Oaks. We would note that the monopoly profit earned by Uncle Emil was a signal in the marketplace that the residents of Oaks wanted more liquor, not less, and that a free market, one without liquor licenses controlled by Uncle Emil, would give it to them at a lower price. Uncle Emil had created a barrier to entry to the liquor market in Oaks and had reaped monopoly profit from it over time. Economists might also point out the equity considerations involved with the local liquor monopoly, and the residents could urge the county commission to determine the right number of liquor licenses, perhaps just one, and put them or it up for auction every year. This would transfer wealth from Uncle Emil to the residents of Dickey County. The residents, as normal people, would probably think this was overly complicated and mean to their neighbor and friend. And on the 17th of May, when they celebrated Norwegian Independence Day with a few shots of akavit, they'd buy it from Uncle Emil and would not invite any of those crazy economists over to the party.
All right. Our next reader is Roger
Okay.
How do you say your last name again?
Aschenbrener.
Thank you.
I got two little pieces this time. First is a structured poem, a villanelle. And a villanelle is like a 19-line poetic form consisting of tercets followed, or 5 tercets followed by a quatrain. There are 2 refrains and 2 repeating rhymes, with the first and third lines of the first tercet repeated alternately at the end of each subsequent stanza until the last stanza, which includes both repeated lines.
Got it.
Now I gotta find it. It's called, and it was written right in the middle of the Bush and Cheney administration, in the middle of the war in Iraq. It's called Mea Culpa, Mr. Cheney, You and I. The image of Harry falling is one I'll never get out of my mind. The words you spoke, Mr. Cheney, the thoughts which reeled inside my head. How many boys have said these words in the battle for Iraq? What a shock to see a friend go down right before your eyes. It's a sad way to leave this world, in the sights of a friend and a hail of lead. The image of Harry falling is one I'll never get out of my mind. A shiver shook me from head to toe. They were my words exact. A thought that haunts me every night, lying sleepless, weeping in my bed. How many boys have said these words in the battle for Iraq? My friend, we nicknamed Harry Carey, a brave and bold Marine. I've known him since we were little kids. His toothy grin, his hair bright red. The image of Harry falling is one I'll never get out of my mind. From the shadow of the doorway, he stepped into my line of fire. When the smoke had cleared, I saw him down and lying in a pool of red. How many boys have said these words in the battle for Iraq? What do I tell his mom and dad? How can I ever face his wife? How do I tell our friends back home that I'm the reason Harry's dead? The image of Harry falling is one I'll never get out of my mind. How many boys have said these words in the battle for Iraq? That's the first one. The second one is a little bit more lighthearted. And it's called A Child's First, A Parent's Glee. My son Zach lives 2 blocks from Manitou Park. He is a 31-year-old, 6'5" young artist with a smile to die for. In 1979, he was 3'6". And on a December day between Christmas and New Year's, when most of the sleds are still shiny and new, the two of us walked through the ankle-deep snow from my house on the hill to the park at Manion. Pulling his shiny new Super Tuper behind, we both understood that this was a first. He with trepidation, me with excitement. We talked about cheap toys, his favorite subject. At the pond at the park, we climbed up the hill where thousands of children had sledded their fill, wide-eyed and giddy and pulling their sleds to the brink of the mound with their cheeks frozen red. When I said for the first time, "Go here, you'll have fun," it surprised me. He looked like he wanted to run. We walked a bit further, and I asked him again. He just kept his distance and my face to the sun. When I asked him the third time, it seemed he would spook. I said, "I'll take the first run, and you can just look." I knew there was trouble when I spotted the wall, and I realized, whoa, this tube really hauls. I pulled up the edge of the tube as I ran, so instead of my head, just my elbow got jammed. I jogged up the hill with a smile on my face and said, "Hey, that was great, but let's find a new place." At the next slope, he stopped, and he sniffed at the wind and watched for a bit what the other kids did. I rubbed my elbow and studied his face. He looked in my eyes and said, "Dad, this is the place." I held the tube as he yelled, "Don't you push." And as I let go, he took off with a whoosh. I sat on my knees with a tear in my eye, and I laughed to myself, "Man, that super tube flies." After dozens of runs when there was no more light, we went for a Happy Meal and laughed at our fright. Then after I dropped him in front of his mom's, I went to the hospital, where they set the bone in my arm.
All right. Our next reader is our new president, Nathaniel Bennett.
As I was looking through a file of my writings over the past 30 years, I come across a limerick that was about 20 years old. And I had completely forgotten about it. But I'll try and recite it here. There was a sailor named Madigan. He got drunk and married a mannequin. He awoke with surprise in his sobering eyes, then went back to the bar all Madigan.
Nice.
So much for my poetry. The Ant Doctor is not the first book that I've started. I actually started one 30 years ago and just picked it up again. But the Ant Doctor is the first one I got published.
This book is?
This book right here. Chapter 1, October 4, 1863, Parts Unknown. "Oh, God, that sun is bright," Daryl said out loud. He didn't even need to open his eyes. The pain piercing through his skull was enough to tell him he was conscious. "Oh, my head feels like it's on a blacksmith's anvil." The heavy pounding in Daryl's head made it feel like it had been heated in a forge and was being pummeled by the smithy's hammer. He also had the feeling it wasn't going away anytime soon. "Where am I?" Daryl fully expected an answer. However, none was forthcoming, and he angrily repeated the question, "Where am I?" The effort was rewarded with more pain and loud ringing in his ears. Through the muddled fog that was Daryl's brain came the slow realization that he was alone. He tried to open his eyes, but only agony greeted him. The merest of slits could only tell him that it was daytime, but he already knew that. "My God, where am I?" He must be improving. He only half expected an answer this time. However, no answer was forthcoming from either man or deity. Daryl tried to think and to remember, but his brain just refused to work. So he lay there in the warmth of the sun, not thinking, not moving, except for the one very persistent desire that continued to nag him. I need a drink. A light rain awakened Daryl to darkness. He was wet, but not drenched. He could now fully open his eyes, yet only the veil of darkness greeted him with silence, and that silence was deafening. The darkness and the silence also conspired to keep his whereabouts a secret. His head was still pounding, but at least the smithy was using a smaller hammer. His thoughts were still eluding him, but he was now keenly aware that the rest of his body was still attached. God, I need a drink, he tried to sit up. Oh! Bad idea. Really bad idea. Listen to me, I'm talking to myself. Only crazy people talk to themselves, right? I'm just glad there's no one here to listen. Daryl was fast finding out that it was easier to talk out loud than to think, as long as he didn't speak too loudly. Okay, I need to figure out where I am. Since I'm getting wet, I'm either outside or in a building with a really poor roof. But the sun was shining earlier. After probing with his left hand, he could feel that he was in tall grass. Okay, I'm lying in the grass, so I must be outside. His right side was strangely numb, yet he sensed pain there, just under the surface, waiting to reveal itself. Anticipation of more pain did little to improve his disposition. With a little more exploration, he found an object down by his hip. With a triumphant smile, he brought the bottle to his lips. It was empty. Damn it! With a great heave, he tossed the bottle away to a total sum of about 3 feet. The effort brought an instant flood of pain from his right shoulder. His head added to the chorus with such conspiracy that he was soon unconscious again. Again, pain awakened him. Only now he was wet and cold. It was daylight again, but the sky was overcast, and he was not tortured too badly when he tried opening his eyes and employing their talents. However, the pain in his right shoulder had awakened, and it was excruciating. It nauseated him and gave him a crawling feeling. I must have been shot, but I don't remember. Carefully, with his left hand, Daryl explored his right shoulder as best he could. No hole, no blood. I must have been shot in the back. A 44 caliber ball from a revolver was not known to penetrate deeply through heavy bone like the scapula. That had to be the reason why he could find the wound. But how did he know that? His right arm and fingers were numb also. No doubt from lack of circulation, and nobody needed to tell Daryl Hagen what would happen if circulation were cut off for too long. He had seen it hundreds of times in the field hospital, and knowing that amputation or death was the only cure. The thought of gangrene was a great incentive not to stay there. Why had he remembered that? Again, his muddled mind failed him again. So again, he talked out loud. What have you done to get yourself to this place, Daryl? Come on, you've got to get up. If you roll over, getting up to your knees might be easier than sitting up. Daryl was about to find out that was easier said than done.
All right. Okay, and our final reader is Caryl Briscoe.
Stay here because I gotta use. It was overcast as I set out from Spokane on a 5-hour journey to the Tacoma Harbor to meet a Sealand cargo ship due in by 3 p.m. On a previous venture, I simply met my friend Thad by the gates when he disembarked. I had no idea this day would soon unfold from one rare surprise after another. This port was a different one than last time. Thad said gates would be open. I was to drive in and park, and he'd meet me there. I expected the usual hubbub of workers, plus a line of trucks waiting with motors running, waiting to have cargo loaded onto flatbeds. As I looked out over the enormous long dock area toward the channel, I was both crestfallen and dumbfounded. There wasn't a soul around, and no ship. It took a minute to process what I wasn't seeing. How could a humongous vessel disappear from sight? For a second, it felt like a bad sci-fi dream where everything vanishes. Searching frantically for someone to impart information, I saw a low building far off to my left with a light on. As I drove over and parked, a jeep came around from the back. A little man in a yellow raincoat got out and went inside. He was quite surprised to see me walk in. I explained my dilemma and told him I was there to meet the first mate. He said the ship had come in 3 hours early and was moored around another section. Hop in my jeep and I'll take you there. He sped across the long, huge dock and around a wide corner. There she was, a humongous vessel, about 260 feet long and 7 stories above water, not counting the smokestacks. A few sailors aft were dealing with some tangled ropes. Okay. My driver parked right up to the ship, got out, and spoke with a man in a sheepskin jacket who was holding a clipboard. That gent told me to go on up the long, narrow ladder that was unfolded down at a slant from the upper deck and had a railing. I then thanked the man in the yellow raincoat. He said, "Have a nice weekend," and sped off. As I reached the top, there was a gal in a trench coat with a large leather bag over her shoulder. She was surprised to see me. A sailor inquired who I was there to visit. He asked my name, and I repeated it twice. After 10 minutes or so, Thad appeared. At first he looked surprised, and then he grinned. The fellow who came to get him said his wife was waiting. That puzzled him. He'd been divorced for 3 years, and all the time they were married, she'd never come to meet him. While he did expect me, he was stunned that I was aboard. He said no women were ever allowed on that ship. Obviously, my driver and the man with the clipboard had some clout. I mentioned the other woman who'd been aboard. Thad told me she was simply the mail carrier and was there momentarily. Then he also explained the ship was 3 hours early and why no one was allowed to disembark. Immigration officers were aboard, searching for stowaways, he said. "Come with me, I have to hide you." This was all beginning to feel like a melodrama. I followed Thad down a couple flights of back stairs. Everything was painted a glossy white, clean as a whistle, literally shipshape. He led me to his quarters and assured me I would be safe there. He said no one would find me, and he'd be back shortly after he finished some tasks. His quarters were cozy. The walls, floor to ceiling, were polished wood, which lent a nice warm feeling. The bed was snug to the wall and perfectly made up. A desk next to it also served as a nightstand. There was a comfy, overstuffed armchair by 2 long, sloping windows, from which I could see the dock below. Soon Thad returned. He informed me all immigration officers had gone, though there was still a few sailors aboard. He had to keep me out of sight a while longer and led me up wider flights of stairs, which eventually opened onto the magnificent top deck. It was an enormous space with glistening hardwood floors fore and aft, and tall floor-to-ceiling windows all the way around, slanted so you could see the ocean below. And there in the center, slightly to the fore, was a high leather captain's chair with an enormous mahogany ship's wheel in front. It looked like a work of art. Thad told me to make myself comfortable while he finished paperwork elsewhere. Since no one except him and the captain were allowed there, I wouldn't be found. Now alone, seated in the plush captain's chair in a private area, on a ship I wasn't supposed to be on, I felt like a privileged stowaway. This was a rare moment to savor. I was awestruck by the 360-degree view of the sky and the sea below. The sun had now come out, surrounded by white billowy clouds. What a glorious sight. Birds flew past the window at eye level, which made me smile at the irony. How fortunate I was to have a rare experience such as this. When I left home this morning, I couldn't imagine what an unusual venture this day would be. Okay. So you see there was more to it than what I read. Okay.
Yes.
We got time yet?
Yeah, of course.
Maybe I'll try this.
All right. Great.
If I can spin it out. I have a little problem reading because I added it at the same time. Anybody else do that?
Yeah.
Or you
yeah.
want to stop and edit
Everybody does.
in the middle of the read.
Huh?
You want to stop and edit in the middle of the read?
Oh, yeah. Okay,
I just
This-
don't tell anybody.
I beg your pardon?
Don't tell anybody and they'll never know.
Oh, that's okay. Tell them all.
Okay.
I'll talk to David about the Shrike missile in a little bit. Okay, this one is, instead of sending Christmas cards, I write a little story and send that. And I think it's kind of a little more personal that way. But anyway, this one is the Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, prosperous New Year. For 2024, time enough for Christmas, and Santa Claus is running late. Archangel Bruce called Christmas angel Steve into his office. When Steve stepped up in front of the Archangel's high desk to report, Bruce held up his power hand for silence while he checked his antique computer. It seems an eternity to Steve before the chief of all Christmas angels acknowledged Steve. Do you know why you've been called? No, sir, Steve replied, stunned and curious. It seems you have been busy and have impressed the boss and established a certain reputation with the Guardian Angel Guild. For some mysterious reason, they like you, and with that comes trust. They don't expect you to screw up and for you to be assigned to our latest and greatest challenges to a happy Christmas. We need to adjust time or speed something up. The boss isn't too keen on messing with time. You were a smart fellow when you were on Earth. Your assignment is to fix whatever's wrong with Santa Claus this year. On his only assignment of the year, he is late by a whole continent. The job is to fix it. Angel Steve took his angel life in his hands and interrupted Archangel Bruce. Sir, I met a person while I was waiting in the administrative line. It seems she wasn't deceased and wasn't supposed to be in line at all. We naturally began talking, and she has been wishing to find a paradise for her car her father bought her for her high school graduation. Then the next thing, she was standing in line next to me. As we were talking, she said that God had given her special talents that allowed her to do amazing things. She asked me where we were. When I told her she was in paradise, she slapped her forehead and said, paradise. And I meant pair of dice. She said one of the gifts God gave her was she could manage time a little as it is passing. You know, like it's a bit slow or fast. She said she can tweak time a little and bring time back on time. That's funny. Where is this girl? The mighty angel demanded. After a moment to recover after being blown to the rear of the cloud by Archangel Bruce, Angel Steve stumbled back to face the angelic boss behind the high desk again. Anybody sleep yet? Well, just don't stand there. Where is she? Sir, since she is alive and not deceased, she was pulled from the line as not qualified and sent back to Earth. Don't just stand there looking confused. Get to Earth, find this girl, burn her back here, stat. That means, why isn't she standing in front of my desk? I'm on it, boss, Steve replied and disappeared to carry out his orders. Steve popped into Carol's room just as she was tying her second shoe. Hey, what are you doing in my room? I didn't invite you in here. Get out. Hey, you remember me? We were in line together in paradise. Yeah, I remember you. You were nice to me until those two guys with wings came and yanked me out of line, took me to the cloud edge, and threw me off. Karen stood with her hands on her hips and stared at Steve. Hey, listen to me. I'm under a lot of stress right now. You see, I'm a Christmas angel. We don't wear wings as a rule. Right now, we have a major problem with Santa Claus. And you said you had some special gifts, like speeding up time or something like that. I need your help. My boss, Archangel Bruce, told me to fix it. Since bring Santa back on schedule, not those words, but some a little stronger. You can just forget it. I'm not going to. Time it. I'm done with doing that. It takes too much energy and it just isn't right, Karen responded. She didn't look too enthused about getting involved with Santa Claus. Since gaining her powers, gifts from God, she hadn't always been a good little girl. Look, Karen, if you could just speed up Santa just enough to get him back on schedule, it would be really save me a lot of, well, stress. Okay, lead me on, Steve, Karen relented. Steve whisked them to stand in front of Archangel Bruce's desk. Since this is Karen Baldwin. She has wonderful gifts from God, and she may be able to speed up Santa to get him back on schedule. Steve explained. Archangel Bruce asked Steve, can you speed up Santa Claus and get him back on schedule? I don't know, until I determine what the problem is, Karen answered. What do you need? Archangel Bruce asked. The main thing is to leave Steve and me alone and not bug us. Got it? Archangel Bruce was set back by the small girl's demands. Okay, take Steve and whatever and get Santa back on schedule or else. Archangel Bruce can be a little bit demanding. Karen took hold of Steve's hands and they disappeared to appear in her own bedroom. Look, Steve, I just need you to stay out of the way. This is the stuff I do a lot of fun. Speeding up Santa isn't hard, just as soon as I know how much to speed him up too. Karen sat down at a computer, turned on the machine. She entered a command, and they were looking at a bird's eye view of a speeding Santa just crossing the Atlantic coast of North America. Santa was definitely behind schedule. After a quick look, Karen disappeared and appeared above Santa on the computer. Steve watched as Santa disappeared and then reappeared as a weak image. The sleigh disappeared from the screen over central New York and reappeared over Chicago. Santa had the magic bag in his hands. The tall building the sleigh was over disappeared, only to be replaced by a view of Denver. So it went for what seemed to be only minutes, and Santa was over San Diego, and a hiccup later was over to Seattle. Steve looked at his pocket watch. Only an hour and a half had lapsed since Santa crossed the Atlantic coast. Santa and the sleigh were 10 minutes ahead of the sun when they crossed Alaska on the way to Santa's village. Santa and the sleigh with the reindeer attached landed in the North Pole 3 minutes early. Mission complete. Steve was sitting at Karen's computer when she popped into the bedroom. Wow, you are amazing. I watched on the screen and by the jumps, I could follow you and Santa across the whole continent of North America. You made it with 3 minutes to spare. Thank you for saving Christmas for millions of children, and thank you too, if they knew what you did tonight. Steve appeared in front of Archangel Bruce's desk. You're back. It didn't work. You failed. The boss is going to sack me, and for that, I'll sack you, you failure. Bruce was furious and glared at Steve. Karen did it. She saved Christmas. You can thank God and the Baldwin family for a wonderful child named Karen. She is truly amazing. I did add my friend.
All right.
Everybody has passed, yes.
Well done, readers.